We tend to think of history as this one straight line, like one event just has to lead to the next. But what if that's not how it works at all? What if one single day, one single battle, could send everything we know spinning off in a totally different direction? Okay, let's get into this.
Just let that question sink in for a second. What if England was never conquered? Because back in 1066, the entire future of the English-speaking world was balanced on a razor's edge. And in this explainer, we're going to see what would have happened if it had fallen the other way.
So let's set the scene. It's October 14th, 1066. A cold, damp morning on a ridge called Senlac Hill. Two armies are staring each other down, and they're about to decide the fate of a kingdom.
Now, in our history, this is where it all goes wrong for the Saxons. Their shield wall eventually breaks, but not here. In this world, Harold's men are tough, they're disciplined, and they're fresh off a huge victory at Stamford Bridge. They do not fall for the Norman trick of a fake retreat. The wall holds. Then, late in the afternoon, the moment comes. William of Normandy himself is knocked clean off his horse. Panic just rips through his army, and by sunset, the great Norman invasion is nothing but a frantic, bloody scramble back to their ships.
And just like that, poof, the single most important event in English history simply doesn't happen. The Norman conquest is a failure. So the real question is, what happens now? So Harold Godwinson, he doesn't die with an arrow in his eye. Instead, he rides back to London, an absolute legend. They call him Harold the Strong. I mean, think about it. The man defended England from 2 different invasions in the same year, and the results of this victory start to ripple out immediately. Okay, so take a look at this, because this is where the two timelines just completely split apart. In our world, a French-speaking ruling class comes in, grabs all the land, and sets up this really rigid top-down feudal system. They even create the Doomsday Book just to catalog everything they now own. But in Harold's England, nope. Power stays with the English earls, the land stays in English hands, and their army is the Fyrd, basically a levy of free men defending their own homes, not a bunch of knights serving a foreign lord. It's all about continuity, not conquest.
And with the Norman threat gone, England's whole point of view changes. Instead of getting dragged into endless wars in France, it turns back towards its own roots. It starts building strong alliances with Denmark and Norway, becoming a real powerhouse in the Scandinavian and Germanic world.
All right, so we've got a different political map, but the changes go so much deeper than that. They go right down to the words coming out of people's mouths. See, the Norman conquest didn't just change who was in charge. It totally scrambled the English language. Without it, well, English turns into something else entirely. Check this out. This is what English might have sounded like. Without that huge flood of French and Latin words, our language would have just kept going on its Germanic path. It'd sound a lot more like German or Icelandic today. I am king of England becomes something like Ish am king of Englaland. It sounds almost right, but also completely wrong. And this table really breaks it down for us. The English we speak is a hybrid, a real mishmash of Germanic and Latin. All our fancy words for things like law and government and food, words like justice, parliament, beef, pork, they all come from French. In this other world, all of those concepts would have Old English or Norse words. It's a completely different vocabulary for power itself. And this different language, it points to a totally different way of thinking about power. William the Conqueror brought that idea of a king with absolute authority, handed down from God. But the old Saxon way was more collaborative. The king had to rule with a council of nobles and churchmen called the Witan. It was a system where power was negotiated, and now it gets centuries to develop on its own terms.
So what does this mean for the average person? Well, you get a society that's way less rigid. Serfdom isn't as harsh. More regular farmers actually own their own land, and local villages have a much bigger say in their own business. Power is spread out more, and you can see a path to some kind of representative government forming way earlier than it did in our history. So England is stable at home. It's got a unique culture, a different political system. What's its next move? Where does it look for its future? Not south to France. It looks north, and it looks to the sea.
It's really just a chain reaction, right? First, William fails, so English kings have no claims to land in France. That obsession is just gone. A weaker Normandy eventually just gets absorbed by France, so that old rivalry disappears. So what do you do with all that time and money you're not spending on armies in Europe? You build ships. You build trade routes. You become a maritime powerhouse centuries ahead of schedule. And this, right here, this graph, it paints the perfect picture. That obsession with conquering parts of France which defined English policy for hundreds of years, It's basically zero. All of that national energy, all that ambition gets poured into trade in the North Sea and the Baltic.
Okay, this is my favorite part. Because sometimes the best way to really understand a different world is to talk about what's missing. The history of this alternate England is shaped by these huge, gaping holes where our most famous landmarks and events should be. Think about it. The Tower of London? Gone. Never built. All those massive Norman castles you see all over the English countryside? They don't exist. Why would they? Those were instruments of control built by a conquering army to keep a hostile population in line. In Harold's England, there's just no need for them.
And how about this one for a bombshell? The 100 Years' War? Never happens. That massive, generation-spanning conflict between England and France was fought pretty much entirely because the descendants of William the Conqueror thought they had a claim to the French throne. No conquest, no claim. Europe is spared one of its most devastating wars.
All right, but this might be the wildest one of all. There is no Magna Carta. That document, the cornerstone of our idea of liberty, was a direct reaction to the tyranny of a specific king, King John, from a specific Norman-descended royal line. In a world where kings always had to share power with a council, that crisis never happens. The problem, and its famous solution, never exist.
So you add all of this up, what kind of an England do you get? You get a completely different national character. It's not an identity forged in the fires of French wars or the Crusades. It's an England that's a bit more inward-looking, more careful, and much more focused on making money through trade than on conquering territory.
Let's do a final side-by-side. Fast forward to the year 1300. The two Englands would be almost unrecognizable to each other. Our England was warlike, feudal, its culture totally tangled up with France. This other England is more communal, more locally governed, and it's a total cultural and linguistic oddball in Europe. It's a proud island kingdom, but it's not trying to build an empire.
Which leaves us with a final thought. We always think of history as something that grows up, like a tree. But maybe that's not right. Maybe a single day can make history branch off, to grow sideways into something weirder and newer and totally different from the world we're standing in today.